Hello again, everybody. It is Scott Casper. This is Takedown, our Nike hot seat today. Well traveled this week, as you may note, but this mic has not stopped in Glen Ellen, Illinois, but it does today. A Chicago suburb is home for Sandy Stevens, one of our great wrestling announcers. She is the voice behind the mic at the NCAA championships and has been doing that and so many other events throughout the year and throughout the years. She joins us now. Sandy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Scott. I'm well, thank you.
We had a ball together, you, I, A.L. Hazlip, up at Madison, Wisconsin, doing the
It
World
was.
Team Trials. And
Yes,
it's the first time in all these years you and I have actively worked a pair of mics together. We've done events together, but never as cohorts actually doing the event. I usually
that's
had a
right.
different role while you had a different role. I got to tell you, I had a ball.
It was so much fun. It wasn't just the event that was enjoyable. The three of us, I think, just had a great time. And I hope that that translates to the audience, to the fans, even though they're not that conscious of how we work together or how we sound together, most likely.
Hmm.
I hope that they got a sense of our enjoyment and our excitement, not just about the event, as I said, but working together. It was a delight.
The competition surely takes place on the mat and the focus is there. You're able to hold focus at many of the events that you do, while literally thousands of matches are being played out in front of your very eyes. Tell me how you were able to do, say, 8 matches on 8 different mats. How are you able to remain so focused at an event where you have that type of action?
Wow, that's a good question. Maybe it comes from having been a high school teacher and having to keep my eye on what's going on in all of the seats and all of the rows. I'm not sure. But probably more than anything else, it's just the experience of doing it. And also anticipating um, in terms of watching the action and anticipating that that looks like that could be a near fall, or he could be going for a near fall,
Hmm.
or she's about ready to score. She keeps pushing, and it looks like, something may be happening over there.
Even with that action and the descriptions that go with the action, you're able to weave in other information about the athletes as they're competing, or even during their introductions. Many times, like academic All-American, or perhaps
Yes.
their hometown or their family or their brothers or sisters. I think you and I had a trio of
Yes.
brothers in Madison, for example, and you were able to bring that up, and that to me is interesting, and I surely think it is for the fans as well.
I do too, Scott, and I do like to include that. It's the human interest information, and probably that comes from my background of being a journalist. And the only kind of writing I have ever done is feature writing. I've written two news stories in my life, and they were both on the spot news. Something happened, I happened to be there. I ended up writing a story about it, and in both cases, they won an award because I was the only journalist there.
Wow.
And a 12-foot piece of a fuselage of a jet plane fell from the sky a block from my house, that kind of thing. But going back to the feature writing, I think people are interested in the individuals who are out there. And if they aren't, then I think they don't have the same kind of connection to wrestling that we hope our fans will have. It's important, I think, not necessarily to say, oh, I like that person or I don't want that person to win. I don't mean that kind of thing, but to see them as human beings and to think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what it was like for the mother of three varsity wrestlers on the same team, all of whom were in the NCAA championship finals. I wonder what it's like for that family. But I think it enhances the actual competition to be able to do things like that.
You know, the sport has long cried for more attention, for more publicity, for more exposure, and for many of us announcers, it makes the job perhaps a little more challenging because we have so much information to express, to talk about, and we have less time to do it in because of television. Can you talk about the evolution of presenting the sport over the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, in terms of the NCAAs, for example, it's much more time conscious. For example, I have 2 minutes and 35 seconds, I think it is, to do the awards after every weight class championship match is complete. And so I have to be very careful that if there's something really interesting about that champion, or for example, if we have a wrestler from a school that has never had an All-American before, I have to be sure I get it in that 2 minutes and 35 seconds. But on the other hand, the opportunity to to share our sport with people who might not normally be watching, the opportunity to get them hooked in our sport via television makes it worthwhile.
Hmm. I think it does, doesn't it? It truly does. And that's what most announcers, that's what we really, really want. We want that experience in the arena to be one that's positive for everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
And if we can get the crowd to the point where they're on the edge of their seat or they're excited, perhaps, not only are we doing our job, but the presentation of the sport as the fan sees it that's watching on their screen is that much more positive.
That's right.
It goes
Absolutely.
back to your late husband, Bob Stevens, who graduated from Northern Iowa and wrestled for the Panthers from '59 to '63. He kind of introduced you to the sport, didn't
Oh, he surely did.
he?
We started dating when we were in high school, and I wasn't familiar with wrestling. I mean, there was professional wrestling on television, but that was it. And he went out for wrestling in the fall that year, and I thought, well, if I'm interested in him, I probably should find out about what he's interested in. And as I've said a number of times, when I fell in love with him, I fell in love with the sport and the people involved in it also. So
Why do you think
he
that?
was known as Bear Stevens, by the way.
I know I had to use his given name first.
Right. But his college coach, Bill Cole, was the one who gave him the nickname Bear.
Is that where I
It,
was going to
that's
ask you that? It was Bill
yes.
Cole, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Well,
Bill.
in your name, in his name, you've established an endowment for the University of Northern Iowa, your alma mater,
That's right.
uh, with funds designated to support the salary of Panther wrestling coaching positions.
Yes.
And that has just absolutely garnered so much positive attention. If anything, it's become a bit of a roadmap for people that would like to do that at that institution or at other institutions around the country. It must warm your heart.
It does. The reaction has really surprised me, Scott. Initially, I did not want my name on it at all. I didn't want a connection. I felt very uncomfortable about that. And the people at UNI talked with me about it and led me to understand um, that it was important because of my connection with the sport to to set an example, perhaps,
Hmm.
because and that's what's pleased me. Other people have come to me, and I don't know how they've heard about it, but they'll thank me, but then they'll say, "We need more people to do what you did."
Right.
And we do need more people to make a statement about our sport at schools all over our country. This is important. this is not just important to me or the school. This is important to our sport. And what I want to say, Scott, is that someone said to me when he heard about this, I didn't know you had that kind of money. I don't, but I have life insurance policies. And I have signed over the life insurance policies to Northern Iowa so that on my death, that money will go to endow the head coach's position. And that's something that other people can do. You know, you might be able to do an assistant coach's position or whatever it might be. Other people may have collections of antique cars or art or something like that. Or, as I said, just simply life insurance policies. But I'm hoping it gets people thinking about what can I do to help my school, to help wrestling, at a school that means a lot to me.
You know, if you think about what you've done, the roadmap you've laid out for others, and I'll tell you this: we've had this conversation, you and I, AL, and with several others actually too, is that sometimes the giving of a gift of this nature, of this size, planning ahead, can be difficult. But there are people at the universities that are able to help,
Oh,
that know how to do this, and perhaps to make it easy. Sandy, if others would like to follow in your footsteps to replicate what you've done, perhaps we should share with them, who they should be talking to.
right. It's the university or the college's foundation, and they were wonderful in working with me and making this happen. It's not a difficult situation. My life insurance agent was well aware of what needed to be done on his end. Um, but the National Wrestling Hall of Fame also has the legacy program, and there are people who have designated their life insurance policies or have purchased a life insurance policy, maybe not enough to endow, for example, at a university, a head coach's position, but it's still money that will go to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame on that person's death. Again, it could be land that somebody might say, well, when I die, I want this to be sold and that land to go to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame or my college or my university.
I love it. So there are people to talk to. There are organizations within where wrestling lives, survives, and thrives,
Mhm.
and you can help it do just that. In other words, you can plan ahead,
Right.
along with the cooperation of your family. Make sure they understand what you're doing and and why you're doing it. I think
My
that
children, my son and my daughter were totally behind this.
how cool is that?
Hmm.
That's well, that's a very supportive family, and they've been supportive of you and your career for over 45 years now. And I want to ask you, of all the events you do and
Oh,
have done, and this may be an unfair question, but is there one that stands out that goes, that's just my favorite event to do, or I really enjoy doing this event because, and can you pinpoint them?
I can pinpoint several events that stand out, probably beyond others. One of the first, if not the first, was the very first World Championship I was able to do, and that happened to be, I was still living in Iowa, which is my home state, um, but it was in Illinois, in the Chicago area. And it was 1983, and it was the World Junior Championships. And there were 17 countries, literally all over the world: India, People's Republic of China, Russia, uh, Egypt, and so on and so on. And the way it was put on, the way it was presented, the way the teams were treated, each day had a different theme and food and decoration and souvenirs for the wrestlers. It was just so exciting. That stands out as one of the best run tournaments I've ever been involved in and the most fun. And the man who was the head of that was Bill Vale. And the next year, Bill was the assistant wrestling director for the 1984 Olympics. And that would be another real standout for me because of the way that that was done. The late Ed Ellerverdi and I were the announcers, and we realized that there were a lot of people there who were there only because it was the Olympics. They didn't know anything about wrestling. So Ed would say, that's 3 points for a near fall. And I would explain that. And we would do a little bit of an explanation of the rules even before it began. And we had so many people who would come up to us and say, thank you. I didn't know anything about wrestling, but it was such a positive experience, not just for us, but for the American team too, but also for the U.S. and the Olympics. And a lot of people have asked me if I've had favorite matches or events, it's usually the event I'm doing. If I had to cut back on events, wow, I don't know how difficult that would be. I do know how difficult it would be. I don't know how I'd be able to do it. But the one match that stands out for me because of the importance of it and the impact of it was Cale Sanderson's final match when he won his fourth title undefeated. And I was blessed to be able to be the announcer for that match and also to announce him on the award stand. That definitely stands out as a plus.
Do your emotions ever get in other words, do you get emotional? I mean, I do. There are periods and points in my career where I've gotten emotional because of, and you're right there with the fans, because when it comes down to it all, you and I truly are big fans.
We are. And we also have been blessed by being able to get to know a lot of these young men and women when they were much younger. And you get to know them when they were in junior high or high school or maybe even earlier. And you get to know their families, the moms and the dads and the siblings. And then these people go on to college. And you might get to know a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And then you get to know spouses. And then you get to know children. So it is the wrestling family. And that's another thing that aids the emotional aspect of it. I try to make sure that my voice is always neutral when I'm talking about wrestlers. Obviously, I'm a huge Northern Iowa fan, but I want my voice to be as neutral when I'm introducing a Northern Iowa wrestler or when I'm announcing a Northern Iowa wrestler as a winner as I am for any other wrestler. It would be so unfair of me if it were any different, and it would be unprofessional. But do I feel emotion? Oh, yes, I do. Absolutely.
The sport has a way to change people. It has a way to change how they look at the world, how they see themselves in the world. The sport of wrestling's fans are very, very possessive of their sport. Can you
Yes.
explain why?
Part of it, I think, is that we feel like we're the underdogs. We don't get the recognition we feel that we should get. But I don't think there's another sport that has as much of a feeling of family as wrestling does. Now, I have grandchildren involved in sports, and there's very much a family feeling on their teams. But in wrestling, that goes beyond your own team. It's the sport. It's the recognition of what it takes to be successful or what it takes to be a wrestler. And maybe you're not very successful, but it takes the hard work, it takes the independence. It's all of those things that end up being life lessons when wrestlers are done competing, whether they've competed for 2 years, for 5 years, for 20 years, whatever it might be. It's those life lessons. And as a female of my age, I never wrestled, but I saw over and over and over again when my husband was wrestling and when he was coaching. And as an announcer, I have seen and I've been blessed to be able to write stories about wrestlers whose lives have been changed because they became involved in this sport. And I think we recognize that. We take it for granted, but we recognize that. The reason I said we take it for granted is that a few years ago when the NCAA Division Ones were in Minneapolis, I was in a department store right across from the hotel shortly before, maybe a day before the tournament was to begin, and I purchased something for a friend, and the lady who was waiting on me asked me if I was from there or if I was an out-of-town visitor, and I told her I was there for the wrestling tournament, and she said, I got in the elevator this morning, and there were some people there from, and she mentioned the school, and then she said, and then some other people got on at another floor, and they were from, and she mentioned a different school, and she said, and they didn't know each other, but they just started talking together. And I kept waiting for the punchline. And then I realized that was the punchline. She couldn't understand why these people who didn't know each other but had wrestling paraphernalia on just started talking with each other. That's our sport. That's our family.
Yeah. And maybe that is the greatest part about the sport that we serve. That is, we are actually serving family. It's much like having everybody over for a party.
Yes.
And, we sit at the head of the table and kind of direct the traffic conversationally, but there's so much going on over at the kids' table.
Yes.
And there really is. And does the side show many times that's provided by the coaches, sometimes silly, sometimes right, but generally it's always on behalf of the athletes that they're coaching. Does that ever bother you, or is that just something that comes with the sport that you accept?
I don't think it usually bothers me. The only thing that might bother me would be the one or two coaches who, in my estimation, are acting improperly. They lack of maturity, perhaps, and that has nothing to do with age, but I think they detract from the sport, they detract from the action on the mat, and they detract from coaching. I'm not sure if I'm making that clear,
No,
Scott.
I think you are, and without naming names, pardon me, without naming names, that's exactly what you're doing, and I believe it to be true as well.
And there aren't very many. There
No,
are very few.
and for the most part, coaches understand that they're also teachers,
Yes.
and you have to pardon me. Teachers are for the most part very responsible people.
And they should be role models too.
Yeah, and exactly.
Right.
We're talking with Sandy Stevens. She's in the Nike hot seat today. She is the generally the most clear announcer at every event. She's been a joy to have on the interview chair today from her home in Glen Ellen. What event is next for you?
Next for me, a week from this weekend, is a one-day tournament in Bloomington, Illinois, called the Midwest Nationals. And this is a summer one-day tournament that has grown and grown and grown. It's kids through college age. And last year we had over 1,000 wrestlers.
Wow.
Just smoothly done in one day. And it's all going to be on all of the matches online, so people will be able to follow that. And I just had a call yesterday from Mike Manahan, who is the gentleman who started this. Mike is one of the co-presidents of the Illinois chapter of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. And he said, usually we have about 13 states represented at this tournament every year. And this year it's bigger than ever. He told me that there are wrestlers from Wyoming coming for the first time and a lot of wrestlers from Ohio. So that'll be fun. And AL and I get to work together at that. So we always have a wonderful time. It's hectic, but it's just a really positive experience. And then I will come home and I will try to rest up for Fargo. That's coming up shortly.
In Fargo, is that a 2-week adventure for you?
No, that's 8 days.
8 days. Seems like 2
It
weeks.
starts on a Saturday and it ends on a Saturday. Just yes, 8 long days. Right?
And then after that, you and I will be joining up for our adventure in Las Vegas for the World Championships.
Yes.
Are you excited?
I am. I just want to get those names and start looking at the pronunciations.
I do too. If you get them before either AL or I, please share them with us because you cannot practice nearly enough, can you?
No. And I always say that I want the wrestler to be able to recognize his or her name and not laugh at me when they go to the mat. But a lot of people, Scott, and you've probably had this happen, say they're very complimentary after I do an international event, and they say, wow, that's really impressive. I can't believe you know how to pronounce all those names. And my response is usually, how do you know that I did say it correctly? Well, it sounded right. Yeah. Well, well, that's good.
Part of it is believing that you're saying it right.
Whether it is U.S. wrestler or whether it's an international competitor, that's the most we can offer them, Scott, is to say their name correctly. If I write a story and it wins a national award, it's pretty hollow if I misspell the person's name. And it's the same kind of thing with announcing. And I've had some funny experiences with pronunciations.
Well, we are fortunate indeed to be able to work alongside some of the great photographers of our sport who take the pictures that are in many cases behind the words, with the athletes, the coaches, the administrators of the events, our fellow announcers, of course. But Sandy, one of the best, and I appreciate the time we spend together. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I hope we can do it again soon. The Nike Hot Seat can search far and wide, but not find someone quite so talented to fill it as it has today. And I appreciate the opportunity we've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and I look forward to being in Las Vegas with you.
The voice behind the microphone at so many events. If you hear a woman's voice, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be this lady, Sandy Stevens. Sandy, thank you so much for your guidance.
Thanks.
And tell you what, you've done a wonderful job with you and I, and hopefully that'll be a great roadmap for other folks around the country who wish to have a lasting impact on their sport. Perhaps you'll go online, folks, and read the Examiner article that Mark Palmer wrote about the endowment that Sandy has created for the wrestling coaching position at Northern Iowa. Get a little more information, contact your university, and do as Sandy has done and create a lasting impression on the sport. And you'll need to designate it because athletic departments are just so happy to give the money to basketball or football. Don't let that happen.
That's right.
Designate the money to wrestling. Sandy Stevens has been our guest of the Nike Hot Seat. I'm Scott Casper, and thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, Scott.